will be trickling in. I should use the mic. My friend told me that all you can see is hair above the podium, so next year I'm gonna have a step stool. It's all good, it's all good. We are going to get started immediately. We wanted to give our friends some time to arrive, and I know that they'll be coming. But before we did that, just wanted to welcome you back and give gratitude for the day, give gratitude to you, give gratitude to your universities, and to those who did enough to make sure we are here. And that means our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors, right? So starting the day with gratitude, I was supposed to give a recap, and I will, but you gotta give gratitude first, right? And so for the recap, we were smart enough this year to have professional note takers. So luckily, if you didn't get a chance to join our sessions, we'll be publishing our notes and we'll be distributing them probably within the week or so. At the top of our day, we had such a powerful introduction, and we had some preaching without preaching, which was amazing. And to demonstrate how vested Duke University is, right? We got started with President Price, and we heard from other incredible university administrators and leaders to kick off our day, which again just shows how committed Duke University is to this work. We then had our panels, Lessons on Black Leadership, Black Girl Magic, and Navigating Black Health Disparities. Again, as I mentioned, all of the notes will be very, very detailed, and we'll be submitting those soon. I think one of the biggest takeaways, if we could put it on a bumper sticker, was take care of self, take care of family, take care of community, right? Economically, in terms of leadership, and in terms of your personal preservation, both physically and mentally. We then had our photo shoot, and the photos are live. They're up online, so check them out. AJ, I think he's here. Where's AJ? I just saw him. But if you did not get your university photo, feel free to pull him aside and say, hey, can you take my picture? And he'll be sure to help out. We then had some incredibly gifted authors to grace us with their talents. We understand that almost all of the books sold out. So if you do want a copy of any of the books, feel free to drop me a line and I'll put you in touch with the author that you would like to be in touch with. Before I turn it over to Sanders, just want to also offer the chance for those who are at the top to come on down if you'd like. We got a lot of space here, and it's nice to just feel like we're more connected. And I know we're social distancing, which is perfect, but we've got a lot of distance to fill. So with that, I'm going to turn it on over to my co-chair, Sanders Adu. Thank you, Sanders.
Good morning. Hey, everybody. Good morning. How was yesterday? Great. Yes, I mean, this whole conference really is about building connections and really getting to know each other across universities, across the country. So hopefully you all made new connections, new friends. And I would consider it a personal failure as your conference co-chairman if at least one or two of y'all don't get a new boo after this weekend. So, just send me a DM, thumbs up, thumbs down, let me know. But I'm really excited for this panel. This is a panel on voting and Black political power. As we all know, voting rights have never been more important in the United States, and they are under attack from state legislatures all around the country. This panel is really going to delve into the power of the Black vote and how and where we need to preserve that power. So we have an all-star panel for you this morning. Our moderator is Blayne Alexander, Duke University. She is a correspondent for both NBC News and MSNBC. If you ever watch Today's Show in the morning like I do, you will see Blayne reporting from all over the country. Paul Brathwaite, my good friend, is the chief strategist for Federal Street Strategies. He is also the former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. So he was the lead staff person for the entire CBC under two chairmen. So Paul's got a lot of insight. He's a graduate of Duke Law School and also the Sanford School, as well as Delaware State University. We have next the Honorable William Mo Cowan. He's my classmate here at Duke. He's the Chief Legal and External Affairs Officer for Devoted Health. He's also a former U.S. Senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. When John Kerry was named Secretary of State, Mr. Cowan, the Honorable Mo Cowan, was the U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, so he's got a lot of insight as an elected official. Chad Stanton, Senior Political Manager for Color of Change, which is one of the leading black advocacy organizations in the country. He's a University of Texas Austin graduate. And last but certainly not least, we have Rhyane Wagner, the National Policy Manager for Black Voters Matter Fund. She's based in Florida. She's a graduate of Stevens College, as well as Florida International University, Biscayne Bay. So please give our panel a hearty welcome.
Okay, so I guess I will pick it up from there. Sanders, thank you so much for that. We do have an all-star panel. I'm honored to sit beside all of you guys today, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. So thank you so much for getting up early and joining us for this very important discussion. I think that we do have an all-star panel, but I think that you guys represent just a lot of different ways that we can attack this conversation. Given a former senator, so somebody who's made policy at the highest level, former CDC director, and then two of you who are on the ground just doing a lot of work, either galvanizing black voters or, you know, working for the issues that are very important for black voters. So I want to, at the end of this, make sure that we have some sort of a toolkit or some sort of something that you can use to go back and make tangible change or get involved if you want to, not just listen to us talk for 45 minutes to an hour. So that's going to be the goal of today. And of course, get some questions ready because we've got a question section for all of you. So I want to start by setting the stage because we've done a couple of different panels like this. Sanders knows, Paul, Mo, all of us were on a panel similar to this, a virtual panel back in 2020, and the stage was very different than leading up to the 2020 election than it is now leading up to midterms. We were right in the middle of a pandemic, no vaccines in sight. It was very hopeless. The protests over social justice were really, really still very top of mind. And then for Democratic voters, it was, many people were galvanized on the cause of getting then President Trump out of office. So very different type of landscape now when you are looking at a target that's less clear. Some aren't necessarily excited, and there's been a lot said about Democratic voters being less engaged, less enthused. So with that, setting the stage, I want to kind of use that to kick off our conversation. And Ryan, I want to start with you. I know that your Black Voters Matter really are doing the work to register voters, talk to voters, all of that stuff every day. We'll talk about some of the ways that the landscape has changed, not just with voters, but also in the aftermath of 2020, how a number of state legislatures have passed laws that have made it more difficult to vote, that have restricted access to the ballot. With all of that in mind, how are you approaching voters? How are you finding them? What is the enthusiasm? And is it an uphill climb?
I'd like to say that we center issues versus anybody's political party. We're not strategically tied to either Democrats or Republicans because at the end of the day, the issues are what's most important to Black communities in particular. And then education, because a lot of people are, after what we've gone through with the pandemic, they're worried about how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to make ends meet. We're going through the Great Resignation. So there's not necessarily this attentiveness like there was in 2020 because everybody was at home, right? So they had time, time to really pay attention to these things in the way that may not necessarily be the case now because we're back outside for better, for worse. So for me, it's always been my goal to tie what's happening at the legislative level, municipal level, to what's going on in people's lives, because quite frankly, while what's happening in DC is very important, what's happening in these cities and counties is even more important, right? Because it affects what the day-to-day lives of people. These city council meetings where they're deciding budgets and what goes to law enforcement and what doesn't. These are some of the things that I'm encouraging people to attend because so much of that stuff happens in the cover of darkness in many ways. I live in Florida, so it's never a dull moment with politics. And we're really going to see the scale and the scope of how a lot of these bills are going to impact Black and brown voters this coming election in states like Texas, where SB 1 is the law of the land now. And we just went through a pretty rough legislative session in Tallahassee in Florida, where we have a governor who has outright made it his mission to draw out Black districts in the state of Florida. So ideally, I don't like to fight things. We don't like to fight things in the courts, but that's where we've been having to stage our battles. Before 2020, we had a Voting Rights Act. We had all these things, these protective mechanisms that we don't have. So we're in brave new territory right now, and it's deeply concerning what we're going to witness in the fall.
Yeah. Chad, I want to bring you into the conversation just kind of along those lines. One, I want to talk about what impact across the board that'll have. And then for both of you, before I bring you two in, I'm curious if that's just everything, the landscape that you just described, Rhyane, is that a difficult, when you go back to voters, maybe people who aren't necessarily fully engaged, but just said, hey, 2020 is our time, I'm going to go out, I'm going to vote, things are going to change. When you go back to them, is there almost this feeling of frustration or feeling of being tired of doing this, or even kind of feeling like, listen, these laws have passed, what can I do about it now, right? Like there's all this legislation has passed, what can I do about it now? So Chad first, and then Rhyane, back to you.
Yeah, no, I think when you go back and talk to people that you may have talked to before, or even go into communities that you may have been in before, there is a sense of frustration. There's a sense of, I did the thing that you told me to do, right? You told me if I vote this guy out, then things will get better. Things will get better for me, and we won't have such an all-out assault on our democracy, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important now when you talk to voters and you go back and you're re-approaching that conversation that you acknowledge, right, that frustration, and understand where it's coming from, and really take time to really deeply listen, and then kind of try and turn that individual perspective towards the systemic, right? And kind of talk about the need for the understanding of the long game. Mm-hmm. It's going to take long-term organizing, long-term strategy in order to make sure that we do see the changes that we need. And that can be frustrating for people, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have all the time in the world, right? We have a limited time on this earth. And so they want to make sure that what you're telling them acknowledges their current reality. And then you want to make sure that you're being reciprocal and listening and saying like, all right, well, what are the things that are important to you? And kind of try and tie that back into how they can change it. And that's through the ballot, and that's I'm glad you said at the local level often, is I think the best way in order to engage and activate folks.
Yeah. Rhyane, did you want to chime in on that as well?
I agree with that. Like Black voters matter. We like to tell people we're not a voter registration organization. Voting rights is central to what we do, but we center capacity building and building power and infrastructure in communities that might not get what they need from a funding standpoint to do the work that they do. We build partnerships in the 12 states that we operate in. We typically will not tell them how to do the work that they already know how to do. So, for example, quite a few of our states are going through a housing crisis, right? People can't even afford to live in the areas that they grew up in. So I want to reiterate the importance of centering the issues first, because quite frankly, a lot of the politicians on either side are going to do what they're going to do. You have very few, I always say it's a lot of politicians and not enough public servants. And so you have to operate accordingly. So our goal was to always hold the president accountable when it came to the Voting Rights Act, when it came to the George Floyd. A lot of these bills were not passed, and that's not necessarily his fault, but you told us you were going to do a thing. And so now we're having to deal with the ramifications of those things not happening. And we're in the middle of a crazy inflation crisis too. So people are in a difficult situation on top of a lot of the anti-democratic legislation I'm seeing in a lot of these state legislatures. It's about taking power from Black and brown communities. If we didn't have the power we had, they wouldn't be trying to take it from us.
That's a perfect segue to bring in our other two fantastic panelists. Thank you so much for that. So Paul and Mo, I want to bring you guys both in, more so from the standpoint of almost being on the other side. Not the other side, but in terms of how things are made and kind of how the sausage is made. And Paul, I want to start with you because you were the CBC director, Congressional Black Caucus, executive director, the last time the Voting Rights Act was authorized, back in 2006. So you've kind of been behind the scenes. You see how these things work or how they don't work, as the case may be. I'm curious, what can Congress do at this point, but probably more importantly, what can black voters do to kind of harness that political power? So we've made the point that, and anybody who's watched any sort of 2020 coverage or any sort of pontification afterwards knows that black voters are just key. You talk about the key voting block of black voters, so you're kind of stuck in this, for many voters, what is frustrating of acknowledging, hey, you're very important, but then getting in, and as Rhyane laid out, okay, the issues that many people say are important are not getting addressed, and then it's a cycle again. So how can black voters help harness that power in a real way?
It's a age-old question, but I think, you have to be and you have to stay in the arena. So the president is one, the legislature, where Senator Cowan served, is another. And those two bodies, have to function properly. We have a 50-50 Senate, and we have a very tight House with a 3-4 vote margin where folks left and took out their jobs, retired, and the like. And those numbers mean something. So you may say, I want to do something, but can you actually get it done, in the House and the Senate? And, that's where they say elections have consequences. If you just think back, in a 50-50 Senate, there was anticipation that the Senate would be a little bit bigger in terms of a margin, and we wouldn't, most people know who Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are today, but I guarantee you on Election Day 2020, no one knew how influential or impactful those two senators could be if they said, no, I don't want to do it this way, and I want to do it that way, and other folks want to do it in a different way. And, Arizona, West Virginia, North Carolina had a race here that folks thought were going to go another way. Maine had a race that folks thought were going to go another way. Iowa, those seats make a difference. I think this conversation, whether it's police reform, election reform, a number of other things look different if the Senate's 53-47 versus it 50-50, because then you have a little bit more of a window to get things done. That being said, you got to stay in the game. You have to stay at the table. Folks use the anecdote all the time. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And if you're not talking to legislators, they're back home this week in the House. You have to have an organization of some of the work that Rhyane and Chad do, engaging with them at town halls that they have at 8:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. You got to show up and say, Congressman, here are our demands, and we're petitioning our government, as the First Amendment says, to redress our grievances. Mm-hmm. These are our grievances. And you showing up and being there over and over again, I think is, key to making that happen. And whether that's, small, as Blayne said, at a city council level, state and local government, where DAs get elected and decisions get made, that really impact your life, I think is where you really have to, stay at almost 100 miles an hour, throughout the process, not just, as it leads up to Election Day. They say politics is a participation sport, and you got to participate every week.
Everything that you say makes sense. It does. I am going to push back a little bit, though, and question, how realistic is that for someone to, and tell me if I'm wrong, but if there are voters who say, okay, I went hard, I did all of this, and boom, okay, we made it to the finish line, and then you move the finish line a little bit more. It's like you got to keep staying in the fight. You got to keep pushing and pushing. How realistic is it to get people to stay engaged in that way, in a meaningful way? And this,
you want the senator to answer?
Yeah, anybody who wants to take that, because I'm this is just what pops into my mind. But I just feel like after I spent a lot of time in 2020 interviewing voters, and people had jetpacks on. There was a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of people who were doing everything that they could to make change in the White House and all the way down. Especially in Georgia, where you saw 2 Senate runoffs. So I just wonder how sustainable that is.
Yeah, I think it's important to recruit and organize more people, right? There's going to be burnout. It can't be one person. It can't be. There's always in every community a super activist, right? There's one person who's always involved, who's always at the town hall meeting. But we have to understand for most people, like they have other obligations, and it's important, I think, to not get frustrated and remember who your friends are and who you're trying to push, right? So we all know you get more flies with honey than vinegar. Right. And so when you're trying to talk to voters and you're trying to talk to people about getting engaged and organizing, and they express their frustration and they say like, well, this seems like a waste of time, it's important to really, really see where they're coming from and understand why they feel like this is not going to be impactful or why this may not be something that is worthwhile. And then work with them and walk them through the ways and talk through the ways in which they can participate. Maybe they can't come to the town hall meeting, but maybe they can send a letter. Maybe they can make a phone call. But also making sure to understand that it's also it's the elected official's job to garner their support, right? And it's not their job to support the elected official and make sure that the relationship doesn't get reversed.
I like that. And I want to bring you in on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look, it just takes stamina, right? You need organizations like Chad's and Ryan's to sort of help provide that stamina, that structural stamina that people can tap into. But it is a sport. It's a blood sport. And you have to recognize that to win, you have to play the long game. The people making the policies now are playing a long game, and they are relentless.
Yep.
And they are counting on most of us to tap out. So you voted in 2020, you voted for a particular kind of change, you haven't seen it yet. So you're disappointed. Frankly, you're pissed off. So you're going to punish those by saying, I'm out this time. But the people who are making and enforcing the policies at all levels, Ryan, thank you for speaking to local, because by the way, there are no national elections.
Right.
That's BS. All elections are local.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And they are counting on you to go away, to recede back to your life, the one that we complain about, the one that they are content to let us wallow in if you feel like there's inequity and injustice, because they know we won't show up. We won't show up in the office. We won't show up at the town hall. We won't show up at the community meetings. And let me tell you something, we don't show up in DC. And I don't mean the big rallies, not that those are unimportant. I'm talking about showing up on the Hill, or if you can't get to DC, in those local offices, your mayor, your select person's office, regularly talking about the things you care about and bringing other people with you. And saying, I'm going to keep coming until you start paying attention to me. Look, it's simple. Politics is simple. Elected officials are simple. I appreciate also what you say, Ryan. Like, not every politician is a public servant. Actually, we may be at a point right now, sadly, in the history of this great democratic republic, where most politicians aren't in it for public service.
Yeah.
But the reality is, they listen. And you may say, well, they're not listening to me. My question is, how often are you in their face? Because the people who are getting the things they want out of the political structure are relentlessly present in every sense of that phrase. You know, people talk about, when I was down in DC, it was right after the Sandy Hook shootings in Connecticut, right? And there were a lot of gun rights activists who thought, notwithstanding decades of gun violence in this nation, particularly impacting black and brown communities, mass shootings, when this white suburban kid shot up a white suburban elementary school, everybody was like, well, that's it. That's going to be the occasion for us to see massive, significant gun reform, right? And I happened to show up in DC at about the same time. I mean, President Obama was in office, right? We had a vote. Look, it was even Joe Manchin, conservative Democrat, and Pat Toomey, conservative Republican, actually came up with a bipartisan bill, and everybody was like, this is going to be the one. It failed. This bill was so important Barack Obama sent then Vice President Joe Biden down to actually sit in the Senate and conduct the vote. And it failed. And I'll tell you why it failed. It failed because the NRA and gun lobby had been sowing seeds for generations.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And when that bill came up, they called to collect.
Yep. Yep.
And while everybody, and there were rallies and big public statements, the NRA and other gun rights groups were quietly making calls, showing up on the Hill, showing up in town halls, reminding those elected officials who they had been relentlessly present for, in every sense of that phrase, your bill is due.
Yeah.
And the payment is to kill that bill. And it died.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the way, you may not like our system, but that is our system. And if we choose to opt out of that system will never, ever work for your benefit.
I'm struck by a couple of things you said. I'm struck by one, the passion with which you delivered that, but two, a couple of things you said, but just this notion of showing up, repeatedly showing up and continually showing up. I want to stay with the local level because that's something that all four of you have brought up and the importance of it. And since from 2020 to 2022, that's where we've seen the majority of the action that, a lot of people are looking at and saying, well, this is going to make it difficult, restrict access to the ballot. How do you engage voters, and yes, you can look at these issues and show that this is what's important, but when you have legislatures that, for the most part, really haven't changed the makeup or anything like that, looking at those issues, how do you combat that? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that people find a political home. And find a political home that may be outside of the party. I think that's why it's important that organizations like Black Voters Matter and Color of Change work to center the issues so that your power and your access isn't directly tied to how, the democratic priorities of like the moment, but you're organizing and strategizing long-term over the things that are important to you, and then you're able to push them the same way that the NRA may be able to push the other side. It's important for people to understand, or it's important for people in the Democratic Party to understand, like, yes, we're here for you. We understand the dimensions of our political system and where we're at, but we also have to be able to say that we have our own independent needs that need to be met, and this has to be a reciprocal relationship, and not one in which we're simply serving the current agenda.
Sure.
And by doing that, I think you also show people that you care about their issues and care about what's going on in their lives, and that brings more buy-in for more generations.
I want to bring business community into this discussion. It's something that, we kind of talked about a little bit offline. We're talking about right now voters, people who are just going out, either getting together in groups, but the business community, we've seen a lot, or on the flip side, we've seen not a lot, as whatever the case may be, when it comes to voting rights specifically. There was certainly Ken Chenault, Ken Frazier, Atlanta's business leader, certainly when the Georgia piece of legislation was coming out, either taking a stand or being conspicuously silent, and there was a lot of pressure on companies like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Delta Airlines, these big companies, to say something or to do something. What we saw action, but after the fact. We saw people speaking up after the fact. We saw people putting out a statement and saying, wow, I condemn this bill, but it's already passed, it's already signed into law. So, there was a lot of frustration around that too. How can business leaders, how can the business community help jump into this, protect things like voting rights, or just harness their power in these ways?
They can't be afraid to lose certain supporters, if you will. And oftentimes when you are faced with making a choice between right and wrong, it's much easier to stand on the sidelines out of concern for your brand. Disney is the largest employer in Florida. They help fund the Don't Say Gay bill. They help fund a lot of the bills from last year, like SB 90, which was a voter suppression bill that I was directly impacted by. Luckily, we defeated the bill in court, but I still have to re-register every year because they're going to purge me out the system yearly. right? They have to not be afraid to do the right thing. And that comes with people not wanting to support your brand anymore. The only reason Disney changed course was because of the corporate pressure campaigns that we put in place last year. Publix is another employer in Florida. The Publix heiress helped fund the insurrection on January 6th. People need to know this so they can make an informed decision in the fall. You need to know who's sponsoring these bills. I have a list that of politicians that help sponsor some of these voter suppression bills. We need to know who these people are because, quite frankly, they are not about the democratic principles of this country. It's about power, and I think at the end of the day, you have to meet people where they're at. Like, we live and breathe this political work, but at the same time, you have to make sure people know what's going on to make an informed decision. The courts, we had a state Supreme Court justice resign and now Ron DeSantis gets to pick his successor. That's incredibly important for voters to know because it could shift the balance of power. They can't be afraid to lose people. Doing the right thing comes with consequences.
Look, I'd add in, it's interesting, we talk about voting and how do we get involved with public policy and who has the voice. And it's interesting when we talk about corporations because we talk about them as if they're this special kind of entity that exists apart from everything else. The reality is a corporation is just full of a bunch of people, right? And corporate leaders, the CEO, the people in the C-suite, their charge is to make sure that enterprise is financially successful. That's what they eat, sleep, and breathe every day. I'm not telling this audience anything they don't know, right? What motivates them is the bottom line. I'm not saying they're bad people, they don't have morals, but at the start and ending of every day, that's the motivation. If you want to change that motivation, or if you want to redefine that motivation, it's the people in that company that's going to do it. They're stakeholders. Now, the Business Roundtable, which I'm sure many of this audience know, is sort of a big DC trade group, if you will, public policy group, tends to lean a little more to the right than to the left. And pretty much every major CEO, and there a couple of years ago, they put forward a policy principle initiative that said, listen, we're going to move away from a view that corporations just should be predominantly driven by shareholder interest to moving towards stakeholder, a much broader term. They were very clear about not defining what that meant too clearly. But nonetheless, that was the principle. A bunch of companies signed on. Remains to be seen what it actually means. But in so doing, I don't know if they really appreciated this, if people were paying attention, they were sending messages and maybe unintentionally, to employees that now your voice should be much more important in the decisions and the processes we make about our business. And there are a lot of people who were very concerned about that. Now, that manifested itself perhaps most readily, I suppose, in the wake of the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor murders, Ahmaud Arbery, when a number of employees, a number of companies said, enough is enough. Y'all need to use your power, your privilege to do something. And we saw that happen. Same thing happened to a lesser degree, believe it or not, after January 6th, right? Although, mark my words on this, when the Republican Party takes over at least the House this fall, and for those of you who may not vote Republican, that is not a message for you to just say, I give up, get in the game. But it is highly likely when the Republicans take the House, you will see many of those companies who stood up and said, I'm no longer going to support those people, will immediately say, well, we've reconsidered, times have changed. Some of them are already doing so.
Yeah.
So, but if you want corporations to do something differently than what they're inclined to do, the people inside those corporations, similar to the people in our communities, have to approach this from a grassroots fashion. Your CEO will change his or her tune when enough of that workforce and other stakeholders, and that might be investors, like public pension funds, who say, that's it, stop either contributing those folks or don't build that plant there anymore, or whatever the case may be. But it takes that level of engagement. It takes organization. It takes activity. Stop me if you've heard this before. Relentless engagement to get people to change, including corporate leaders. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Paul,
Really-
I want to bring you in.
Yeah, Blayne, what I would want to add to this is that, look, I think everything that's been said is accurate, but I don't think capitalism and these corporations being able to make money can be successful outside of a functioning democracy. And when you have state legislators and legislators in general threatening corporations for standing up for police reform or election reform and the like, that is a dangerous place to be in, and dangerous for the life of our country, and for businesses to thrive and function. This effort in Florida to take away Disney's tax status, which was conferred upon them, 50 years ago, has now shown to have an effect that the people who live around those areas in the counties might see their taxes go up, and Disney just stands on the sideline and says, you know what, we're not paying that anymore. And you now, the taxpayer, have gotten this bill where this whole effort was supposed to be to punish Disney. What I found ironic was that, that happens in socialist and communist countries where we go and, take over or punish businesses. And I thought that was what Democrats were supposed to be doing in terms of their socialist march. But I don't think Democrats control the state of Florida government or the state government or the legislature. But I really do think, again, the employees of these companies speak through their corporate leadership, and those employees giving voice to things that matter to them are where I think the change is going to come from. Some businesses have stepped up. I mean, there is a group of businesses, Business for Voting Rights, where they all signed on and have actually leaned forward on voting rights in Washington. They represent almost 5 million employees across the country. But again, that has to be sustained, and it only gets sustained if, again, the issues stay at the forefront and you can galvanize elected officials to do the right thing, or what you believe to be the right thing.
Chad, I'll bring you in for the final word on that, and then we'll open it up to questions. So get your questions ready.
Yeah, no, I think at the grassroots level, I think franchise holders are often overlooked as business leaders who are also very engaged in the community, very connected to the community. When I worked for Congresswoman Johnson in Dallas, there was a family who held almost a ton of McDonald's franchises, but they were funding and present at almost every community event. Those were the people that you needed to talk to if you really wanted to connect and get involved within the Black community, especially the Black power at the local level. And I think it's really important that people understand, the person who owns 10 McDonald's in your neighborhood has a very large voice, right? And being able to tell them, you're in my community, you're making money in the community, it's important that you also stand with us on the things that are important to us, so that the people who need to listen will listen. I think it's, as you said, people who show up every day, the people who show up to the congressional office every day, you're going to get a little bit more leeway if you're somebody who is a business leader within the community. And that's below the CEO level. That can be very effective in making sure that things move in the way they need to.
I love that, expanding our perception of what is a business owner, what do businesses look like. I want to bring in some of you from the audience, because one, you've been very engaging. I've heard a lot of mm-hms and a lot of applause and things like that, so I know that you've got some questions and some thoughts brewing that you want to bring to our panelists. So let's start to get some of you to line up. We've got 2 microphones here if you have questions or anything that you'd like to ask. But this isn't the final word from our panelists, too, because I'm going to reserve some time at the end for them to give answers to one final question that I have. Someone's making their way down. Here we go. And if you have it addressed to a specific panelist, you can, or if you just have a question for anybody, but I'll try and get just one person to answer so that we can get through a bunch of questions. So that's all right there.
What are some engagement tactics you use? I don't know if I should say tactics, but at the local level, maybe Chad might be the one to answer, when people say, well, I don't want to vote for the lesser of 2 evils. Because I hear that commonly, especially in the Black community.
Mm-hmm. Encourage people to run for office. I mean, seriously, it's usually the same old white guys running for office. Because in because we will often talk ourselves out of it, right? Like, oh, I don't have this law degree, I don't have these things. They don't do that. Another thing that we've done is teach people how to give testimony in city council and county commission meetings. We're doing a teach-in just around the disastrous redistricting that's happening in Florida, where basically the governor is drawing out black districts intentionally because racism. So we are going to have to prepare not only our partner orgs, but your average voter on the ground, because that's going to change where and how they vote in the fall. They might not vote in the same place in the new map if we don't win our, I'm going to speak this into existence, we're going to win our lawsuit. But in the meantime, people need to know how that impacts them directly, right? These new maps. With
Ryan,
the census,
can I ask a question? I mean, I'm just curious because what you brought up is very important about the governor and the redrawing of the maps and what he's done there. I just want to know by a show of hands, and I know this is a very educated group and we're not giving out grades here at Duke, but how many folks were aware that of the 4 black seats, the governor in the state of Florida is drawing out 2 of them so that we would go from 4 black members of Congress to 2 black members of Congress? That's about 30% of the audience. And he's done that quietly, openly, but quietly, and there isn't a penalty. In politics, there has to be a penalty when those things happen.
Yeah.
And somehow we've got to get to that point. And I know.
Ask Lucy McBath about her district, which doesn't exist anymore.
yeah.
Georgia as well.
Tennessee, Tory Harris's district was drawn out.
Yeah.
And his district covers Memphis, my hometown. So what you telling me is I won't have representation in Nashville? Like this is not just Florida. I hate to beleaguer Florida, but it's been on and popping and the block is hot.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important. That's why lobby days, I'm still a huge fan of lobby days, taking your average person up to your state capitol so they can meet these people that supposedly represent them, right? Know how the legislative process works. I'm a firm believer in all of that still, because in order to change or dismantle a system, you need to know how it works first.
But you know what? I'm very curious. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, what I try and tell people is like, you're not voting for a best friend.
Yeah.
You're not voting for a hero. You're voting for
right.
somebody
That's
who you're going to have to push.
That's right.
So you're voting for the opponent that you're going to be sitting across from at the table. It's not going to be a morally perfect world in which you're like, you're voting for somebody who's going to do everything and who's going to represent everything that you want them to represent. You're voting for somebody that you're going to have to, A, they need to take your calls, they need to take your meetings. B, they need to understand that you have the ability and the power to get them out of that office if that needs to happen. So like, you're not voting for like a chum. That's it for me.
Yeah. Very quick question, follow up to the point that you made. Surprised by the show of hands, Ryan. When you talk to voters, how many people in Florida were aware of that, right? Like, how many people are not folks who are very engaged like you, but how many folks are aware of just what these things look like?
Well, what Ron did, I call him Ron. What Ron did is absolutely unprecedented.
Yeah.
Nobody, no governor has presented their own maps.
That's true.
So I would love, he's in violation of our fair
Yes,
district
he is.
amendments that we fought for in court because they tried this before behind closed doors. In 2014, we were able to get fair district amendments. But I also want people to know that does not cover our cities. I didn't know that till this year. And so it was important to me to let other people know that. And this is why we're believers in relational organizing, where you call your family and friends, bring them with you. It's not just about knocking on doors and making phone calls for a particular candidate, right? So these are the year-round things that I know that we did, especially with the census. Florida, Ron did not ask for any money intentionally to, y'all, I have other nicknames for other governors like him. He intentionally did not ask for funding around the census for the state of Florida. So as a coalition, it wasn't just BVM, it was ACLU, it was all of us as a coalition of the many to get people to take that census, especially Black and brown communities, because we were working at a disadvantage from a funding standpoint. Luckily, we actually got a lot of the work done, but that we had to come together as a coalition, all of us, to get folks to understand why this census was so important. We had legislators in Tallahassee, I was in the hearings on these maps, that said, oh, well, Black people didn't need representation in these certain areas, out loud. And he claims that they didn't draw the maps based on race, but you knew the racial data, voting data of Black people, and lied and said our voting habits had dropped by 50% when they doubled after 2020.
Let me put.
I want
to get our next question. Yeah, let me put a pin in this though, because I've sidetracked us though. I want to. You've been waiting so patiently. Go ahead.
Faye Dansby from Purdue University. For Rhyane, the 12 states that Black Voters Matters Fund's working in, are they getting it that if we can hold the House, just get a few more, hold the Senate what we got, get a few more seats in the Senate, that you pass the George Floyd bill and the voting bill? I mean, are they getting that? Because we can get these things passed with just a few more Senate seats. And then Chad, thanks for the work Color Change is doing with disinformation and social media areas, because that directly affects how people enthusiasm with voting goes as well. And then another one I'm gonna throw out too is when you talked about lobbying on Capitol Hill, do you see the effectiveness that the Divine Nine do? Because they all have days they go to lobby at the Capitol. Is that being effective? So I know I threw 3 questions out, but I just want to see the reaction. And thank you all for being here too.
3 good questions. Thank you for those.
Questions.
Do you
Black and brown communities are definitely getting it, especially in Georgia, where Raphael Warnock has to run for a full term. The sense of urgency is definitely there. It's not every state. We are in most states in the South. We've got Michigan and Pennsylvania as well. But I will say, at least with our folks, we know what's at stake, right? That we don't have time. Time is a luxury right now especially when it comes to the Voting Rights Act or the Freedom to Vote Act in the Senate. So, I mean, we'll see. I'm going to be hopeful that Republicans do not take over the House in the fall. But again, knowing that our politics, it swings on a pendulum, we've got to be prepared for either outcome. And again, that starts with making sure people have the tools, not only for the upcoming election, but also around the issues that they value most.
Chad, let's get your answer, and then Paul, do you want to tackle the D9 question? Okay.
Yeah, just really quickly on social media, I think the work of misinformation and disinformation is to, as you said, dampen enthusiasm. I think a lot of that is done by shutting down conversations. When people express their frustrations with the way things are going currently, telling them that they just need to, be quiet and understand what needs to be done is only going to discourage them further, because people are going to feel as if you actually really do not care about what is important to me. You don't care about what's affecting me directly. And so I think the work is in acknowledging and listening to people's complaints, while at the same time moving the conversation from the individual to the systemic, so that people can understand, like, yes, it's very frustrating right now, but we can change these things through action. We can work together. We can organize together in order to do that. And I think the misinformation and disinformation we're seeing is very much geared towards not even being able to have that conversation. And that's why I say more honey than vinegar, because once somebody says something that may be disagreeable, being open and being willing to walk through that conversation is important. And I think noticing and seeing the trends where people are like dogpiling or doing things in order to make sure that people feel as if they can't be heard is very important.
On the Divine Nine question and their lobby days, it's fantastic that they do it. It just needs to be more regular and more focused. There are organizations and companies that have more lobbyists working for them than the people in this room. If they call a meeting and they call all of their advocates together, there will be more people filling all of these seats than the number of people in this room. So imagine the impact that they have when those people go out, not just one time a year, but every day of every year, because it's your job to get up every day and represent their interests. There may be good interests, but at least it's their interest. Imagine if the Divine Nine had a group of people who were getting up every day and advancing the things that they care about, whether it's more money for higher education or K through 12 or health care or social needs, mental health and the like. That's where you would get the effectiveness. When they all show up in their pink and green or their red and white, fabulous. But I need you there the next week, and the next week, and the next week, because you don't need them just to come and talk to you for that one day, because they're all going to come and take the picture and on the steps, and everybody's going to get all their points in and whatever. But if you're not there the next week when they're voting on something to say, you know what, last week we asked you about George Floyd, and we asked you to sign on to the bill, Congresswoman, and you still haven't done that. Why? What else do you need? What else can we give you to do that? Or whatever, it could be a small business bill, it could be all kinds of things that they're working on, but you have to be there every week and every day in different ways. You see them in their office, then you see them socially, and to the point where they're like, oh my God, here she comes again, I need to get on that bill. That's what you need to have happen.
You say something about fundraising.
Jump in.
Yeah, I've been trying to stay away from the fundraisers, and my senator alluded to this. He said in every way, you have to show up at that as well. And so, it takes money to run for office.
Yeah.
I had a congresswoman say to me the other day, I've got an opponent. I said, well, how did you do in your last quarter of fundraising? Not very well. I'm like, well, that's why you have an opponent. You have to raise money, and the way they raise money is from people giving them small donations. I never thought my mom was going to get involved in politics until Barack Obama ran for president of the United States, and here's my mom sending him $20, $30, $50. I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? She's like, I want to see him win. He says I'm part of the campaign with this small contribution, and by the way, he's sending me stuff every week, keeping me informed of what's happening on his campaign. And I think people laughed at him until he raised more money than Hillary Clinton did, and everyone was like, oh my God, he's on to something here.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So Blayne, just one more point on this, just 1,000% on that, everything. You got to show up and show up often. And by the way, you got to show up and see people you think you'd rather actually not talk to, right? If, with all due respect to the Divine Nine or anybody in this room, if you go to DC and you're just you only want to seek out the members of the CBC, who are all good people. By the way, show up on a Wednesday, because the CBC lunch on Wednesday is unbelievable. Right?
It's what they would call on and popping.
Yes. But you have to knock on the doors of the people that you need to sit across the table and argue with, right? The people you may not even want in your own house, but guess what? They are in the house, and they may run the house, and those people need to know that you're going to be there. So yeah, show up in all your paraphernalia. Come on that day. But when you come on that day, make sure they've seen you enough times that they greet you personally. It's good to see you again, right? And so you can say, it's good to be back. Now let's talk about that thing I've now talked to you about 3 times.
Right.
Show up locally too.
Yes, thank you.
Like, for example, in Florida, it was alphas everywhere at a lot of our events. So I think I will acknowledge the hesitation around the C3 status. So it's not in violation of your C3 status to talk about what's at stake for voting rights. That's not, and people need to know that. But I will say, at least in Florida, the alphas were showing up and showing out. Georgia, the Deltas were showing up and showing out, and that's because our co-founder's wife is also a Delta, and Wanda, our field director's a Delta. So she, even just within the folks that they know, again, it's relational organizing at the end of the day. Who do you know that's an influencer in your community that can really get the ball rolling? It doesn't have to be an elected official.
I think the theme of this is stay involved, right? Stay in the arena, I like what you said earlier. I want to get this final question for you because we are running short on time, so I want to make sure that we get your final question.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and this is actually a good segue from what you just said, Ryan. Good morning, my name is Edwina Sims. I'm the Senior Director for Multicultural and Affinity Engagement at American University. And given the culture at American University in DC, we have so many students who are really actively involved. Growing up myself in Florida, Having been a daughter of 2 sitting legislators, a sister of a legislator, I grew up in a bit of a fishbowl, but recognizing the importance of policy and politics. And so one thing I talk to my peers about is the importance of creating a culture that fosters a stronger sense of excitement and engagement around civic engagement. And I think, Blayne, you brought up the fact of what is going to be the sustainable opportunity for us. And I think it's really an opportunity for us to engage people at an early age to let them know the importance of being involved. So I want to ask to the panel today, as well as speaking to us as a collective and the responsibility that we all have, how can we reach back to future generations, whether it's current students at our universities or students who are in K through 12, of ways to really excite them and letting them know about the importance so that when they do get to that age, they understand the importance and gravity of being involved in the civic process.
Fantastic question. And I'll say this too, because we're so short on time. I'll just get each of you to answer this and let that be the final word on our panel, because I think Sanders, we're good. Okay. So go ahead.
Was it how we get
Yeah,
students
yeah.
engaged?
How do you reach back and get students involved?
Again, it's a situation where you have to figure out what students care about, right? So, for example, like I said before, we're doing a teach-in just on what's happening with the maps, but eventually we'll get to the legislative agenda around CRT and some of these other student loans, all of those things, affordable housing, because a lot of our young people are incredibly impacted by how high rent has gone up in student loans. But I think you have to figure out what it is that they care about. A lot of young people aren't necessarily engaged. You have to figure out, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. So what is it in your day-to-day life that you're passionate about? And a lot of students in Florida are passionate about what's happening with our climate because it directly impacts us every hurricane season, every bad storm. Black neighborhoods, for example, in Miami are flooded on a regular basis. It doesn't even have to be a hurricane. And what happens after a disaster? Why is it that wealthier neighborhoods get what they need immediately, but black and brown neighborhoods in South Florida don't? They're the last to get what they need from various agencies, right? And last to get their power cut on, for example. So it's just about figuring out what it is students are passionate about and organizing around that, because it won't necessarily be affordable housing for everybody, right?
Yeah, I would say tap into the organizations that they already have built, right? So when I was in school, I was president of Black Student Alliance. So there's a ton of ways in which students organize themselves that really provide a structure for you to engage and really understand how they want to move, where they want to move, and what you can do in order to help. And kind of make sure that you approach with a spirit of humility, as people say in church, and really listen to what it is that they need and ask how you can join in a true partnership.
Yeah, look, we're a village, and for those who've become elders in the village or on our way, we have a responsibility to raise up the next generation. And the ways that are being described here, we gotta just engage with our folks. Our schools aren't doing it anymore, talking about civic responsibility, the power that comes with civic engagement, right? And we gotta let our young folks know, meet them where they are, but help them appreciate if they choose to opt out, they're giving up the power that is inherently theirs, often forever, because policies will be put into place that impact them long after this moment of deciding to opt out is gone. And so we have to talk about that to our kids, our cousins, our neighbors around the dinner table, and our places of worship, and we got to engage on all levels. Then I'm going to say something that's maybe provocative for some in the audience. I hope not. And we've got to give ourselves space and grace to exist along the political spectrum. Paul actually said something earlier in his opening comments about being at the table. Black folks need to be at all the tables.
Yeah, and
right?
Create your own.
If you're a Republican, a conservative, I got nothing but love for you, right? If you're caught up in the throes of our former president, I don't understand you. but I'll talk to you. Help me understand that. But we can talk about issues that impact our community. If you grew up in the black church in the South in particular, you know what black conservatism looks like, right? Because it exists there. So let's not pretend like it's not in our community. Let's embrace it, but get it focused on helping our community. And hopefully we can get some folks around that table that'll bring some sanity to that conversation and help us all lift up. And we got to talk to our folks, because we may have young people who don't see things simply through a leftward view, right? And we can't write them off. And if we already got people out there who see it differently and are in power, we need to be in their faces, in their offices, talking about these issues, because they are at the table. And if we're not engaging them, we're doing ourselves a disservice, even if they may frustrate the hell out of you. But you just got to keep showing up.
But also that shows, I love that last point that you made, but also that shows, especially when you're talking about young people, it shows being able to talk to people who have different political views, which is something that, has certainly escaped us in recent years. So I definitely think that's an important point too. I'll let you take it
Yeah,
on.
look, I think, our kids are smarter probably than we give them credit for. I know these smartphones have made them smarter. They have access to information that we didn't have access to. But I do believe we have to look at the big picture and understand the strategy. I think this whole conversation about giving parents more rights in their schools and muzzling teachers from what they can say and can't say, or teaching the textbooks and not teaching textbooks, it is all, and defunding our schools and not teaching civic education and not having music classes and not having sports activities. It is a way to control what is currently in place, which satisfies the people who are in power. And power concedes nothing. They want more power. And unless and until we understand that there's a strategy around this and combat it with, information to become victorious over that, we're going to be stuck. But it's not hopeless. I just say, you just have to understand what you are up against in doing it. And again, in your own families and larger families and communities, we can do that in ways big and small. Some of it's going to take money. Some of it's going to take organizing. But it's all there at our fingertips. I mean, we're more think about the fact that they organized the March on Washington without a cell phone and without social apps and social media. And 250,000 people showed up. Imagine with the tools we have available to us and the connectedness that we have about what we could do. I mean, the folks who are in this room, if we stayed connected in ways big and small, not just for political purposes, but for our everyday purposes, like what you're doing in your daily lives, all of us probably can help one another in humongous ways, but we're not connected enough to make it actually happen. Imagine us being connected. And I'm not saying we got to get together at Duke University every Saturday morning, to do that. But in a virtual world today, now that COVID has shown us, we can all jump on a Zoom and share information in 20 minutes and, touch as many people as we want to, invite or not invite. I mean, it just shows you we can do this. That's another way you can connect with people. You don't have to show up in Washington. You can ask the congresswoman or congressman or senator, hey, can I get a virtual meeting with you and your team? You tell me the time and the day. We can do it early. We can do it late. I don't even have to come into your office. I mean, we just have to use what's available to us for our youth, for our, middle-aged folks and the like, and go at it and get it done.
Paul, I'm going to let that be the final word. Let's get a round of applause for our fantastic panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
I think that, one, I love our title, Voting in Black Political Power, and I think that all four of you came at this from different angles and brought different levels of expertise to this. And I said at the beginning that we wanted to give you tools. We wanted to give you actual tangible things that you can take away. I think that these four certainly did that, right? Like different ways to think about things, different ways to get involved, to engage, to get other people engaged, and just come at it from different ways. So thank you for all of you. Thank you all for being so attentive and for welcoming us today.
And let's give a hand to our moderator.
Yes.
The one and only Blayne Alexander. So I want to leave us with two quick thoughts for this panel. So one, the staying connected. That's what the collective is all about. So the Black on Black Collective will be that clearinghouse on issues around voting, but on issues, all the things we talked about these last 2 days. So the collective will be your home to bring people together. And then and Ryan, you said, run for office. We actually have people in the audience here who are doing just that. One of my classmates, Amina Thompson, is running. I'd like for her to just briefly come and tell us what you're running for, if you don't mind. And then we'll end on a note of action.
Sanders, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. My name is Amina Thompson, and I'm running for Clerk of Superior Court here in Durham County. So I would be remiss if I didn't get up here and just echo the importance of local offices. So much wealth, and maybe I can, turn around to the audience. So much wealth passes through the clerk's office. The clerk is the judge over wills, estates, probate, adoptions, name changes. And so this is vital to our lives and legacies. So I'd be remiss if I didn't get up here and thank you again. And I really would appreciate your support. And something that you all can do for me, early voting started on Thursday. So if you live in Durham, please vote. And if you don't, you can still donate. Right?
Yeah. Can I just say a word on that, please?
I have my card here with a QR code on it, so anybody can scan here and donate $5, $500, every bit counts. Thank you so much.
And listen, if you're one of those people who says, listen, I don't like money in politics, I don't like campaign finance, that's cool. But you're a smart investor. Invest in leaders. Invest in people, right? That's what happens. Invest in that system.
So guys, we're going to take a break. We have one final quick comment, and we're going to take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll come back.
This comment is for Stephanie Hand. To the comment earlier about politicians not being servants, there are some still out there. Stephanie Hand, if you're here from Charlotte, my name is Sharon Williams, but she is my sister clergy in the United Methodist Church. She's a deacon, and she is running for office.
All right.
In Charlotte, for District 6 council seat. And she has to get through this primary first. And so if you're here from Charlotte, please, and you're not her Facebook friend, please friend her. If you are her Facebook friend, send that social media post to someone you know who is also in Charlotte. But she is a servant, and she is committed to the work. So I want to thank you all for your commitment to this work and for the work that, of course, happens in all of our faith communities to engage people civically and socially. So thank you so much.
Again, thanks to this wonderful panel. We're going to take a 10-minute break, come back here about 11:30, and then we'll start with the next panel. Thank you very much.
Great.